everybody. Welcome from the future to present day to 5 months from now. Like I always say, welcome to Unfiltered and Intentional, also known as Mothers Unfiltered from back in the day. Sometimes I get tongue tied, sometimes like, But yes, thank you so much. Today we're going to be talking about police shootings, and this is part 2. I know we had the episode a couple of weeks ago when we were just talking about the different things that are going on in the community. A lot of people had a different comments and perspectives, but I really wanted to bring a police officer on. I actually had somebody else in mind, but they weren't able to come on the show at this time. But thank you so much. May I call you KP?
Yes.
Thank you so much. We have a retired police officer here with us. And the reason why I wanted to bring you on the show, because I wanted to talk about different perspectives. I wanted to talk about facts. I wanted to talk about the training that you guys have. Before we get into all that juicy, good details and all the other stuff, Ty, can you do us the honors?
Oh, am I back on today? Y'all know what it is. If you haven't made it to YouTube, go to YouTube, type in Unfiltered and Intentional, like, subscribe, and share. And if you haven't made it to the Facebook group, do the same. Always show love. We love y'all. We do what we do. Big heart. Stay safe.
Yes. Also, I wanted to give another little drop tidbit that we had posted another video yesterday, and it was just kind of getting to know the host, because I know we had did a little questionnaire for Ty and then Specs, but it just so happens that me and Liz are in the same state, so we were able to link up together, and that show is hilarious. I do a lot of serious stuff, so this is something that was the opposite. But just jumping into back some serious topics, can you reintroduce us for the people who just turning in and just a little bit about your background, KP, how many years you served as a police officer, and then we can go from there just to introduce yourself again.
Okay. I served as a police officer for 23 years, 8 months, and about 11 days. It was truly a fantastic career. I am a Florida State certified defensive tactics instructor, a fitness instructor, attorney general certified convenience business inspector, crime prevention practitioner, CPTED practitioner. I am just a student of training, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I loved my career. It was truly fantastic. I love serving the citizens of of the city and the state. It was awesome.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah. Thank you.
That being said, I'm going to take this show very slow and then ramp it up. So I wanted to start off just by saying, when you decided to become a police officer, because you are of African American descent, did you have like feedback or did you get flack from the brothers out there, like, oh my God, I can't believe you about to join, this group, the racist cops and da-da-da. I just want to start off there. Did you ever get that?
I thought she was starting off.
Never. No, it's all right. It's all right. We're all adults, but I can tell you, I come from a family of cops and military and firemen. So that wasn't ever a discussion. The discussion, if you can call it that, was one where my highest value was making sure, like, my why is making sure my family members and my mother in particular is not disgraced. So it's a little bit different for my family, where we have a very strong, close-knit family, and we're just driven by different things. So I wasn't worried about the brothers, because most of my siblings are cops. And most of my family members are cops. And 118th Street in East Harlem is named after William Woodlawn, who was a firefighter, who was my uncle. So us serving the citizens of this country is the norm. I have a cousin who's a United States Air Force pilot. My nephew just graduated from the Air Force. From the boot camp. So serving people is what we do. So it was just a matter of being reminded that we are called to do something. You're not policing the community, you're policing with the community, which is a big difference.
Okay. My next, So my next question for you is, in the process of you serving the community, of course, you served for a lengthy time. There has been many police shootings by unarmed people, different instances. You hear them actually current day. You always hear that question of there's a few bad police, you know, all those are just those one-offs. Did you ever have that moment where you knew you seen something wrong? You knew that somebody ain't doing what they need to do, policing right, and you just was like, you know, is it a thing, that code blue, that silence that they say that you guys have? Like, you know, you see something and you kind of keep it to yourself. How does that?
Well, Florida is a little bit different than the organizations that exist in major cities throughout this country.
Okay.
So have I been around officers that I don't like personally? Yes. Have I been around officers that are a little bit rude? Yes. Have I been around officers that are committing a crime? No, because homie don't play that. I'm not going to jail for nobody. So I have not seen that. I don't think any officer that I ever worked with have seen that. But yes, we have seen officers that are rude and officers that I would not responding to a situation where my family members or friends called for the services of law enforcement. But I have not seen that. This is the blue wall of silence, or that code of silence. That is something that may exist in larger police or larger states, but that does not exist in Florida. No one, there's too much oversight. There's too many. Most agencies, when you think about it, this is 18,000, right? Roughly 18,000 police agencies throughout this country. When you think about it, the large portion of them have less than 25 officers. You don't have the room to make, you can't get lost in the hay, so to speak. So your inappropriate conduct is a little bit more visible. Now, what happens with that inappropriate conduct may be another thing, but you are going to be held accountable, right? So before I even start talking about what law enforcement does, I always like to start out by making it clear. And I don't speak for you, I don't speak for anyone but myself, but one can truly grieve for every officer that has lost their lives in the line of duty or been injured in the line of duty and by police overreach. Those ideologies are not mutually exclusive. One can hold officers in high regard, but still demand that they act on a higher accord. So I like to get that out there. I'm not sitting here criticizing my brothers and sisters that wear that badge or wear that shield. I would say to you that if you really want to find out the undertone and overtone of an agency, look at that agency, right? So the culture of any organization is shaped by the worst behavior the leaders are willing to tolerate. So if you really want to find out what's going on, I always tell citizens, join your citizen review board, go to the Citizens Police Academy, become a volunteer as often as you can at those particular agencies, and you will see it because it's not that hidden. You get what I'm saying? Like, these things are not hidden. If the things that we talk about with, like, let's use Minnesota for an example. If you really want to find out how good the agency is, ask the citizens that they're serving. Like, I could sit up here and tell you my bio. My bio is like 3 pages long. I could tell you, but my resume is like 5 pages long. That's not relevant. But what I can show you are the thousands of emails I received the moment it was posted on social media that I was retiring. That to me is more important than what my fellow coworkers thought about me. What people that I have arrested, people that I have dealt with, people that I have served, what they say about me is more important than what my coworkers said about me. To me, the citizens that you serve, that's like me asking someone who is a racist, and calling someone a racist is giving them a whole lot of power. I don't do that. You will rarely hear me use that term. I'm not giving someone that kind of power, because racism technically is truly the institutionalized practices of bigotry and hatred. An individual that doesn't own anything can't be a racist. I'm just saying. Let's just get that out there. If you don't have a household and a window or a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of, you could be biased and prejudiced, but you're not racist, because that's institutionalized practice of bigotry and hatred. We need to stop giving people that kind of power. So what I'm saying to you is, when you look at how a person views another person, It's their perspective. And what is your perspective governed by? It's governed by your experiences. So if people say they hate the police, I am not troubled by that per se, because I don't know their life journey. When officers say they don't like a certain group of people, I'm troubled by that, because that's our job, to serve and protect. We put our hand on a Bible and we put our hand up and we swear to serve and protect. Whether or not someone likes us is irrelevant. I don't care that you don't like me. I don't care that you don't respect me. Now, I may go home and be troubled by it, but at the end of the day, it's my job to serve and protect. And it may even mean my life being lost serving and protecting someone that doesn't like me.
My last soft question, because I think the first three were going to be a soft question. I thought it was. I thought they were soft. My last soft question would be, all the professions that you deal with, cosmetology, a banker, I don't know, a librarian, whatever you can think of, when they're greeting the customer, when they're talking to the individual, they have a level of professionalism. That level of professionalism, they're not cursing. They're not saying, hey, you hoe, get over here, bitch, this, that, and the third. When I live in Florida, and I remember one time having an experience with an officer, and I was telling the officer to take the floodlight from my little kids. They were little then, because they had the floodlight on my car. To please, can you dim it or something, because they're screaming and crying. And I remember the officer calling me out of my name, calling me a bitch. And at this time now, currently thinking about it, of course we could say, oh yeah, that's rude and this, that, and the third. But you hear a lot of times police cursing. I mean, they're just they just coming back at you, and you come back at me, I'm gonna come right back at you. So you have to at that moment make a decision. Well, wait a second, I'm cussing with no weapon. He's cussing with the weapon. What's going to happen here? I got my kids. What's going on? So you as the civilian or the person that they're stopping have to make that decision. Is there a reason why that's not controlled? And that's, like I said, this is my soft low question. Is there a reason why police officers could just put the profanity? I ain't want to say all the words that they be saying, but go ahead.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry that happened to you, right? No one should be spoken to out of their name. No one's job should afford them, unless you're a comedian, should afford them to be unprofessional in the profession, especially of law enforcement. So I can't speak to someone's mindset. So that individual was a bad individual long before they became a police officer, right? It's just that the badge or some semblance of power just is like a drug to some people. But that is something that you should be always complaining on. And I don't know if that officer or deputy had a camera on, but those are the things that need to be dealt with, because that cannot be, and probably won't be the first time, and it definitely won't be the last time. That is completely unacceptable. But since we're pulling people from the human pool, you have a lot of people who probably should not be officers. And it's incumbent upon citizens that live throughout their communities to take part in what is the hiring process. What is the standard by which you're hiring people? Because that behavior is unacceptable. And that behavior, me yelling at you, is going to cause you sometimes to yell back at me. And then I'm going to charge you with resisting, some cheesy charge or something like that. I just think that that's unacceptable. It's unacceptable.
And I'm sorry to cut you off. I think about that. I think about Sandra Bland. They had the camera, the dash cam camera, and Sandra Bland was smoking in her car. I know I don't know all the different laws of the states, but I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming that you have the right to smoke a cigarette in your car if the police is pulling you over. Because in the dash video, he's asking her to put her cigarette out. She's not listening to what he's saying. She has an attitude. She stated, yes, I'm angry. I don't have to tell you why I'm upset. You know what I'm saying? And then now they're getting engagement. Like you said, you're saying one thing, I'm saying one thing. And I when I think about those things there, how do we stop that? I mean, is this something that we can just, it seems like a lost cause.
I honestly, there's so many caveats to your question, but I would say to you this: as a society, we have to determine what we want law enforcement to do. We should not, in my humble opinion, I can't speak for everyone, but I can only speak for me looking now from a satellite instead of ground view. If we don't want law enforcement's bad or good in something, we should take a badge and a gun out of non-law enforcement needed situations. I'll say it again. If you don't want bad things to possibly take place in non-violent situations, stop having law enforcement enforce expired tags, tag light out, ornaments hanging from your rearview mirror. Stop having law enforcement. Those are not criminal infractions. Those are civil infractions. So stop having law enforcement do that, because what we are doing is we're putting law enforcement in situations where they have to provide conversation to basically non-combative people for the most part. We're not trained like that. We're not trained like that. So we have defunded and downsized the finances for many different entities in the community and given that job to law enforcement, and they're not trained to do that. Handling an active shooter, handling a violent situation, law enforcement, at least in Florida, is real good at that. Handling situations with kid gloves, law enforcement is not good at that, because that's not something that we put emphasis on. We don't emphasize that in the academy, not because they're bad, it's just because they're teaching you how to deal with an imminent threat or being in imminent danger. They're not teaching you how to deal with mom with 4 kids and 3 of them are screaming and one of them just got out of their seatbelt on a traffic stop. We're not taught how to deal with that. So we need to take law enforcement out of non-law enforcement situations, and we won't have that problem. And we need not be afraid to say that. Right? Do you have doctors? Do you have a plumber painting your house? No. So why are you having officers do things that they're truly not trained to do? We're not trained to do that. You don't have a surgeon mopping the hallways of a hospital for a reason.
It's true.
So we as a society need to truly understand the interworkings of our agency. What are they doing?
Who does
what are the
that?
results?
Okay, people, who does that?
No
right
one.
Now,
That's the problem.
But okay, so right now, all of us, everybody listening, moving forward, like, yes, that's right. People should not, everything you're saying is right. Who do we go to get that change?
Our elected officials. Meet with your commissioner, or county commissioner. I think they're still called commissioners in the county. Meet with them, and especially when election times are coming, get it on paper. That's when you can get them, because they're human beings. They're busy, but right now this is the hot potato. We can't pass the hot potato. We have to truly become entrenched and ingrained in the interworkings of politics. The best time to get a politician's ear is around election time. Right. Do it in reference to, there are so many groups that are doing things that are positive. There are groups that are creating these platforms. We just have to find them. And then we have to work with them to get in front of the biggest ears. And the biggest ears are politicians that are running for office. Because why, like they're doing something like this in Ithaca, New York. Why is it that we have law enforcement doing things that they're not needed to do?
Go ahead,
Ty. You have now Orange County and Orlando PD are working with mental health facilities and responding to calls that way. That's because citizens got involved. That's not because law enforcement said it, because most of us that you work in any environment, you want to maintain the status quo, right? You want to maintain the status quo. If it's going well, I don't want no more work, no more less work, right? No less work. I just want to keep on keeping on. But citizens, because of platforms like this, have become engaged and have mandated that officers and deputies now work with and not against mental health facilities, and they respond to nonviolent calls. That's how it works. We have to speak to our elected officials. Our elected officials that control the budgets for these agencies can then say X, Y, and Z needs to be considered, worked on, and there needs to be a policy and procedure.
Even if we bring it to the elected officials, don't we have to still engage with the unions? Police are governed by unions.
Yeah, but every 2 to 3 years, possibly 4, there's a new union bargaining. So that's not difficult. That's not difficult.
I think we need to put it on that the police, the system in general, because again, they're engaging with the community. So engage with the community, not police the community. I know that a lot of these law enforcement agencies are filling out for grants to keep the money coming in, to be able to have staff, to be able to deal with these different aspects of the community. And they have to be accountable for that as well. I mean, we can do what we can do as the larger community, but they are still a system that unfortunately holds a lot of power. So if you're going to take this funding from this source, then you need to live that life also. And that's not always what's going on. Again, like if we're supposed to function in different facets, then that's what we need to do. And all parties need to be accountable to that. And we need to make sure that people at the top are the ones enforcing that, because we talked about it offline. You can't change people's ideologies. You can't change their experiences. You can't change the way they feel about religion. You can speak to them about how you feel and what your thought and your experiences are. But once they go out in that field and they have a bad day, or a procedure gets lost in the mix, or they decide to curse somebody out, again, they need to be held accountable for that. And it starts at the top.
What was you gonna say, Liz?
So actually I have a question kind of leading back to where you started, Kia, where you mentioned, the first day I cuss at a student is the last day I'm going to have my job. Right. And so cops get caught on camera all the time. I guess that's a twofold question. When they are caught on camera, even if it's not, all over the 5 o'clock news, are there any repercussions for that? Or is it just part of the job? Is that just locker room talk, right? And then I guess my second question is, who do you report that to? I mean, if I had an encounter today with an officer that was unpleasant and I wanted something done about it, who would I mention it to, and how would I follow up to be sure that there was any accountability? I guess that's three questions.
Internal affairs. That's a great question. Internal affairs and cash money. Is there an actual policy against using profanity? Conduct unbecoming. You can't speak to people like that. So yes, Cash. I believe that's the person's name. Cash. Yes. So if you have, most agencies are going to have an internal affairs bureau or internal affairs unit or internal affairs division. That's who you would report it to, and then there would be some kind of a number aligned with your complaint, and a report would be done, even if it's not taken, something that is not valid, like the officer, the officer looked at me funny or something. They're going to generate some type of documentation that you made that claim, and then it's going to go from there. But we're talking about behavior, right? That's what we're talking. We're not talking about if the officer likes me. So we can't control what's going on in the back of someone's head. We have to work at regulating behavior. We can regulate and legislate behavior. I can't regulate and legislate how someone thinks. So we need to think about that.
KP, it has to be, I think that's the first start, but it has to be more, because right now, and I don't want to use you as an example, Liz, but you made the example of saying you got cursed out right now. So right now she has an interaction with a cop. Cop is like, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, okay, I reported to, agency, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Can you please tell me why Officer Joe will get the writ up, and maybe he's been written up 13 times. Who knows? He gets fired. He's out of here. But then he can go to Kansas, something station, and now he's working all over again as if he has a clean slate. If I hurt a child, if I'm a teacher and I am doing these things, I will be barred, banned, and everything. I may even have my face on TV somewhere, and I can never go around a kid again, or my whole family will probably get persecuted or something. How come for police you could just hop? You could hop from station to station, state to state, and there's no type of thing.
Great question. Why? Because most likely, I don't know this for sure, but I would beg to say that I am probably spot on, that there isn't a national registry for that kind of conduct.
Let me write that down.
There isn't some kind of national system that houses that.
Okay.
That's why you see that when that's been talked about so many times, in reference to the past, year and a half? Mm-hmm. That's been brought up multiple times, that there's no,
but that's
nationwide.
And that's what breaks our hearts. That's why we have this show here, because if we're talking about having a national platform where this thing can be put in the system and it could follow you, at the year 2021, why wasn't that established in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, early 2000s? Now we're doing it now. Now we're talking about
Be honest. Why was law enforcement created?
Well, I got that on my phone.
We went from overseer to officer, right? Law enforcement was created to regulate the movement and basically govern the movement of people that look like us.
Yes. Slave patrol.
If we don't know this, but
yeah.
if you don't know this going in, if you don't have an idea of how Paramore became Paramore, if you don't have an idea of that, then plus coupled with the fact that you're not really learning this in school, you're learning mostly European history. There's really no education pertaining to the history of the continent of Africa prior to slavery. So you grow up not because you're bad, because everything you're seeing looks like you. So you must hold and wield the power. You must be better than. And more simply put, when we are intentionally motivated to question what does not align with our belief system, right? So if you believe you live in a meritocracy, that is to say that you are where you are because of how hard you worked or didn't work, then it's hard to acknowledge that something like racism and sexism is affecting people's lives on a daily basis. Well, and I'll just drop the mic after that because that's what we're talking about.
KT, you're about to break tie.
We're gonna put a T to time out.
He's speaking my not that exact.
We got you on mute because of the audio, but you got something to say? Oh, he's over here clapping. No, I just want to say this. I actually had a couple of people say, "Oh, you gonna have a police officer on your show?" Oh, I know he's gonna be just selling out. I know this. I said, "Nah, this brother's on it. This brother's on it." And it was like, "We'll be the judge."
No, it's not about. It's not about that.
We'll be the judge of that. And I just want to say, "Aha! I told you so."
No, these I can tell you right now. I had the pleasure of working with and being mentored by some unbelievable human beings. Unbelievable. Again, I've met people that I don't necessarily like. I could be wrong. I just had a bad vibe. I didn't like the way they communicated or didn't communicate. I didn't like the subtleties. It's not necessarily overt because we're looking for that big aha. I told you he was a racist. No, that's not. It's the subtlety. You can also call it victim discounting, right? Someone comes at you and says, "I was the victim of a crime," and you're finding out ways in which to discredit them. It's very similar to a man doing that to a woman. Honey, you're crazy. You get what I'm saying? This happened because of you. Get to the point. Hurry up. These are all the things. So that's what happens from time to time with certain people. And it's not a bunch, but it doesn't have to be a bunch because all it takes is one bad encounter to ruin your life and everyone else's life around you.
Hey,
again, it's a matter of perspective, though. Your perspective is based upon your life experiences or the historical trauma or generational trauma, i.e. someone else's experiences.
Ooh. Hey, Liz, you want to read some of these comments? I will put it up on the thing.
Okay. So they took the compassion of acting like a human being.
Yeah.
Nobody in local or federal are going to do anything. The police are there to oppress the poor. They are there to keep the fear in line.
I want to make a comment off of that. I remember working in different domestic violence shelters and different things. And when you work hand in hand with law enforcement, I would always say that I really, really, and I don't think they started this as of yet, but I am pro having the police rotate. Because what I notice is when you have a police officer, let's just say he's been doing this for so many years on the same neighborhoods, they get desensitized. And I really, really do feel that police need to have that break. Because if you're always seeing certain things, then they kind of put everybody in the whole community in the same limelight, you know? I really, really think that there has to be mental health institutions right there for the police themselves.
Aren't the police supposed to get mental health? No.
There are questionnaires. There are questionnaires and exams that you take, pre-hire, that in the hiring process. And if you're involved in a critical incident like Pulse, if you're involved in a shooting, if you were severely injured, there's going to be entities that come in and work with you. Yes, but on a regular basis, that's not.
That is crazy.
This is, hey guys, it's that simple. I guess when you talk about who to report, who to talk to, you know.
Well, we have to, as citizens in our communities, do our best to get involved, and because they're going to expose you to a lot. If you go to a Citizens Police Academy, you're going to meet people from IA. You're going to meet the bosses from IA. You're going to meet the bosses from the drug unit, the bosses from community engagement, the bosses from communications. There are things that we just don't know about the interworkings of law enforcement, and law enforcement needs to do that with the community. It's a collaboration. It's not this or that. It's this and that.
Well, I got to say something to that before we go ahead and read Cash's statement, because when you had somebody, and this is just an example, it's a one-off. I hope it's a one-off, or maybe probably no, it's not a one-off. When you had somebody say, hey, let me be a part of this whole community citizen thing, and maybe even doing my own policing, you get the Zimmermans, you get the people that shot Aubrey. You know, I'm all hungry, you know, thinking like, hey, I am, you do look suspect. You do have these things. I mean, so I think it's just very unfortunate. And I wanted to throw that into a question real quick. Do you feel that we should police our own communities? And what I mean by that is, you know, I don't think that there's enough. I mean, on one end, the neighborhood watches, it can go wrong. We've seen it go wrong. And then on some ends, it looks like they can go right, because we know Mr. Jenkins up the street. We know Leroy down the block. We know our neighborhoods, you know?
Right. So to answer, first I'll deal with Cash. Yes, and that has a lot to do with what I talked about.
I'm sorry. Let's read it first, but you know, just in case. Right? I'm sorry. So
the police though do seem to be better at using kid gloves when policing certain neighborhoods, right? So we have, as a species, human beings, Homo sapiens, not because there's no such thing as a race of people. There's only one race. They're called Homo sapiens. Scientifically, I'm not talking about the social construct of whiteness or blackness or redness and yellowness. That to me sounds crazy because we're Homo sapiens. But anyway, so we have sympathy, empathy, and compassion and unbelievable restraint for that which we identify with and look like, period. End of story. That's factual. So Cash is right about that. But what you're talking about, to clarify, George Zimmerman was not an active member of Town Watch. He was not. He was in self-proclaimed neighborhood watch vigilante. And Mr. Arbery was accosted and killed by self-proclaimed neighborhood watch individuals. Those individuals, their conduct would have been explicitly told and basically said no to, because you are not vigilantes and you're not going out there doing police work. So when neighborhood watch, and just so you know, the city of Orlando is first, second, or third in the nation for the past 16, 17 years because they do it the right way. Orange County does too. Well, most agencies in Central Florida. So what I'm saying to you is there are rules and training, unbelievable amounts of trainings that they are afforded as members of neighborhood watch or community, whatever you want to call it. You don't necessarily have to call it neighborhood watch, but you do have to follow the rules of National Town Watch. And Town Watch houses the names of individuals that are members within their cities, counties, and neighborhoods. That's how I know what I'm talking about when I say that Zimmerman and those other three, actually four crazy men that went out there and killed Mr. Arbery were not members of National Town Watch, because that's public record.
But how does I mean, so you have this, you said the Town Watch, you have the names, you know, Bobby, Sue, Marion, whatever, a lot of Karens. But with that being said, how do we, who's police? I mean, somebody said, I don't make a citizen's arrest. You know, these crazy fools.
Well, you cannot do that in the state of Florida. You were able to do that in Georgia. That's why, like, we have to be educated in law in our respective communities. In the state of Florida, that is no longer, that you cannot do that. I don't know when it stopped, but it's probably stopped before I moved here in '95. In the state of Georgia, I believe there's legislation that has just been passed within the past 3 weeks that is going to prohibit people from taking legal action on their own, making citizens arrests. So you have to know the state in which you live in. Florida, you can't do that. Yes, ma'am.
I mean, technically, you can't make a citizen's arrest, but per very recent law that was passed, right? If you see people rioting, you can run them over with your car. Damn, let's go back to citizen's arrest.
You better preach, Liz.
I don't know. yeah, not that that's not a police issue per se, but I mean, yeah, it is about knowing the law. But as quickly as we can work on getting them to change something like that, where they create something brand new. I mean, so if you see 3 people together for a common objective now in Florida, you can legally run them over with your car because for you guys that don't know or you don't follow Florida news, our governor saw the young woman get run over in Charlottesville, and he thought that should be legal. He sided with the white supremacists. I mean, that's like a literal, like straight from a headline. He looked at that and created legislation.
He sided with his people.
I think he made that law because guess what? There was so many rioting and different things and protests during the summer, in 2020, that he's like, and he was really adamant, like, we're not doing this stuff. We're not playing that game down here, especially when they found that Derek Chauvin had a house down here in Windermere. People started kind of gathering and these things, and he definitely did not want that. I mean, I'm assuming there's reasons why he created laws, to want to. I never heard of somebody approving that you could run a vehicle through a crowd of people. Like, wow. I mean,
3 is a riot.
It happened in Charlottesville. But that's one of the reasons why we have to become educated on what our elected officials are actually doing and signing off on, and get them out of there when they don't align with our ideologies.
What do you do as a cop, though? So right now you haven't retired. For whatever reason, you are assigned 5th Street, and they're doing the local Save the Dolphin, protest or whatever the case may be. And somebody's like, damn, a damn dolphin. I said, whale. And they take the car and ram it in these people. I mean, of course, at that time, you're calling for aid, paramedics and EMS, and trying to, help the people that are hurt. But knowing the law states that Mary or Bob is fitting to get off. I mean, how do you feel about this? Like, because you're to enforce the law.
It's not that simple, though. That's the same as the Castle Doctrine. That's the same as the stand your ground. Just because you can doesn't mean you're going to get away with it if you do it. So if I don't know about the details of that law, but 3 people standing on the corner holding a sign, it's not open hunting season on those 3 people. I guarantee you. Now, I would say to you that law may have had things in it, like if there are damaging a building or property.
Right. You have to be specific.
You have to be more specific than that. But I would say to you, we have to come together as a people to understand we have to hold in high regard people rather than property. I'm not justifying burning a building, but when I'm saying
we're not doing that either.
But think about what we're saying. What happens when people that look like us are being killed? We by us or by the police. We actually question whether or not they should be dead. That's a sick world we live in. We have to start valuing human beings and valuing human beings that live in socioeconomically deprived neighborhoods first, because we don't. All of us are guilty of that. We need to start marching when young people are killed by stray bullets, just as we need to march when young people are killed by officers and there's question marks around it. Because it seems very disingenuous to march for one and not the other.
But they do that in the smaller communities, and I have to put it out there, through the SNUG program, and they are called the rapid responses. So within 72 hours of a shooting, the community gets together and they go out and they march in that community and talk to the community, some of the leaders. So it may not be seen, and that's on purpose. It's not
media doesn't show that
within the bigger picture, but I'm telling you, there is a program out there that does exactly what you're talking about, and it brings the community together. They're marching.
We need that.
Okay, but I have more questions, right? And so I'm sorry, it kind of just keeps going. And so, but you mentioned, for example, Kia's question was, so if there are 3 people and they get run over, do you arrest them knowing that that's the law? That kind of thing. That's what happened with George Zimmerman. They showed up that night. He shot this child dead. The kid is dead. They, took it. He said he was standing his ground. He was not arrested. We had to protest to get him arrested. Just arrested. That was the initial boil up to begin with that situation. Wasn't
look
even
at that
so much
agency that took place. Look at that agency. I'm
That's
not
Central
knocking that
Florida,
agency.
which you were just touting.
But
So-
what I'm saying to you is, I doubt wholeheartedly if that would take place right now, and he would just be. I don't justify what he did. We all know what
Only
he did.
because people
I
are
think
trying to
because
make
they
them
became
accountable now.
Stanford, and we all three of us, KP, Liz, and I, we definitely, and maybe even you, Ty, we are very familiar with Sanford, Florida. Sanford, Florida is known for its racist antics, and of course, and I say it, and I keep saying it. I am so glad. Unfortunately, it's not federal where every police officer, every county is mandated to wear a body camera, but thank God for people who are recording these things. I feel so sad for every time there was an incident, because we look at the ones who've died. What about the people who've been abused and all different types of scenarios, and there was never ever any cameras, and it's my word against yours. And like you said, we don't have respect for the poor, right? So when we say, oh, you were selling crack and drugs, you should belong in jail anyway. Who cares if they slapped you upside the head? Or what about when you have the actual president, our past president, say, yeah, you know, police officers, how about you bang them in the head real quick before you put them in the car? I mean, like, what? When you say take it to the top, you can't go so far. You can't change the ideology.
I mean, but by the same measure, and you know, KP, you mentioned that, you know, we should protest every time somebody is struck with a stray bullet, or, you know, and I understand that, but I do believe, and I'm of the school where, again, we had this conversation on the last, you know, this thing, right? This particular subject. I believe most police officers are good. Let me go out on the record with that. Most police officers are good. All police brutality is bad, right? I mean, and so the whole notion that, well, we should be mad when criminals kill our kids, just like we are when cops kill our kids. There's one thing, when the drug dealer is responsible for an overdose, that's horrible and they should go to jail. When a doctor intentionally overdoses somebody, we hold a doctor to a higher standard. That's who I went to make me well. When I call law enforcement, that's who I call to help my situation. I never called a criminal. So if a criminal did something criminal, duh, you know what I mean? But when a cop does it, I just feel like it is a louder protest and it is a louder march. I mean, you know,
as it should be. Yes, I agree with you 100%. Yes, you put it really well. Yes.
You got something to say, Specs? Let us know. We can take you up and mute.
Come in, Specs. Come on in.
Yeah. No, I'm not gonna say that.
No, you're right. You're right. You eloquent. That was very eloquent. That was spot on with that. 100%.
Liz, you want to read some of the more of the comments?
So Cash said soft skills and customer service should be expected, whether dealing with a Black or a white person.
Yes.
That's fair.
Definitely.
Yes.
Humble Lion. Nobody in local and federal government going to do anything. The police is set up to oppress the poor. They are set up to instill fear and order, and are a barrier for the local well-off citizens.
Yeah. Well, wait. I feel that there's truth to that statement, and I think it's based on the perspective that you're looking at, what window you're looking from. Because at the end of the day, I live in a very nice neighborhood. I can count on my fingers how often I see a police officer.
They live here. they live in your neighborhood too.
Yeah, so I mean, so maybe in a month I may see 0, and in the next month I see maybe a community officer. I don't know. I never see anybody. Now, mind you, we have a neighborhood watch or whatever they want to be, and they're like, "Hey, little Jamie is opening car doors. You know, make sure you put your car in the garage, or there's a loose, you know, dog in the neighborhood." But at the end of the day, I promise you that we're policed differently. And since we're policed differently, and this may go off based on what Humble Lion says, creating a barrier for certain neighborhoods versus others. So I guess it's based upon what topic. Go ahead, Ty.
I mean, okay. So for me, again, looking at the bigger system, I don't want to look at the individual, you know, departments, right? So if we're talking about on a federal level, federally, we know where'd she go?
She'll be back.
Okay. Federally, we know who runs what, right? Mm-hmm. So we're talking about changing things on I don't like you over there.
I don't know.
I'm like, Right.
Hey.
But okay, so let's take, what is it, the EEOC,
Mhm.
which
Yes.
does what? That is the federal, right, agency
Yeah.
that oversees equal employment opportunity, right?
Yes.
And as of right now, not that they hadn't had it, but it is being exposed now that they have racism and disparities going on the federal level.
Shocking.
Shocking, right? But see, and this is what I talked about, what actually you and I kind of touched base on before off camera. We're looking at those individual cops and we're looking at those individual departments, but on a larger scale, who, and speaks back to what you were asking, who actually holds them accountable? Because they have every law written. We don't need any more laws. They wrote laws to stop enslavement, and then they wrote laws to start enslavement. We have the laws. We can recite it year to year, decade to decade, word for word, right? But when you have it written, it doesn't mean it's being enforced. And that's what it is. So
There really isn't any federal oversight, though, outside of what they're doing now in Minnesota. They're going in to find out and to look at the disparities in their
The
police
DOJ.
practice. But overall, there is no federal oversight. It's state and local. You have Florida Department of Law Enforcement. That's a state entity. Federal entities, I just said to you that there are approximately 18,000 law enforcement entities. And you have an entity in the federal government that oversees all of these agencies. I guarantee you they don't have enough people. Even if they did 20 agencies a year, they're still not, by the time they get up to 100, they're going to have to start all over because they don't have the funding. Everything that we're talking about is funding. How are we going to pay for all of this? And I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. What I'm saying is, how are we going to pay for all
Another
this?
reason why, not even just for funding, I think another reason why it's not done at a federal level is because, of course, when it comes time for election, you want to be able to appease your big masses of people that you want to vote. You want to appease both sides, you know? And then at the same time, I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to put it out there, you know, I kind of get unfiltered sometime. I was like, you know, there is nothing on the books that has the Ku Klux Klan as a terrorist group. And I'm going to start a petition. And I'm going to go ahead and do this, that, and the third, and shake up some people. And then I thought to myself, I'm like, well, wait a second. Why don't they have these individuals on the terrorist watch list? And
Do you really want us to answer that question?
Oh, I know the answer, and that's because they are the people in the federal government. They are.
What they say? You never see Miley Cyrus and Hannah Montana in the same room at the same time. It's like that.
Just like that, Liz.
But we don't have anti-lynching laws that haven't been passed. There's no anti-lynching law that's been passed. Think about what I just said to you.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. We got anti-3 people gathering.
Can you still beat your wife? Can you still beat your wife on Sunday with something no bigger than your thumb? Because that was a law.
You're on the law book still too.
That was a law.
Here.
All right. So Humble Lion said nobody in local and federal government. Oh no, we read that one already.
Yeah, my bad. Sorry.
All right. So Mark, most of the officers who operate outside the law or abuse their power tend to have a history of abuse, which seems to go unchecked.
Which, let's go back to Derek, because when they did research, he had complaints, numerous ones already in his file for doing the same thing he did to murder Mr. Floyd. 18. He did it to other folks too.
Approximately 18 incidents of excessive force.
18. We have somebody agreeing.
Oh, snap.
Oh, snap. Oh, he preaching that.
Oh, he was.
Thank you. Been saying
well, the problem is, though, how there should be something, to your point earlier, Kia, there should be something in place that affords citizens that officers police their communities to know about the good work and bad work that officers are doing. But there isn't, because how do the citizens that he's policing in their communities not know that he has this history?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We know when someone is a sex offender.
Yeah.
It's on the National Registry.
Not always.
Well, majority.
Well, most of, at least in
The ones that have been
Florida,
caught.
The ones that have
Florida?
been caught and labeled as a
Right.
right. Okay.
right? The ones in Florida.
So let's see. So Aurelia said, it's sad seeing policies getting passed or being put into action for the most irreverent things, but POCs cannot get simple laws to prosecute and dismantle oppressors and terrorist groups such as the KKK, which is what Kia was saying. Yes. Some. So and speaking of that, I think when you were talking a couple episodes ago about like gun control, right? We were saying that, you know, if more Black people were armed, we'd start seeing more laws that, you know, restrict owning guns, right? So going back to my anti-rioting thing, because right now it's irking my soul if you guys haven't caught that yet. So I'm interested, and I'm not encouraging this, please God, no, I'm not encouraging this, right? But if we had 3 people that were together holding signs up against, you know, the killing of another innocent Black kid, right? Legally, you can run your car into them. That is a riot. And if they are, you know, behaving a certain way that you don't like and they're in your way, move them with your car. So after a hockey game, if they are, you know, climbing trees and burning buildings and it's more than 3 people, if somebody that did not look like a hockey fan were to drive their car through, how fast do you think they would repeal that law? Or do you think that it would be,
well,
I'm asking out of curiosity.
Anyone listening, do not
Don't
do that.
Don't do it. I'm just curious.
Piggyback what you're saying, Liz. I know Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo, what's his name? The Cuomo guy from CNN.
Andrew, I think.
Yes.
Oh, no.
Yes, and I'm Don Lemon. Usually they converse. Yes.
Yeah. So he was basically making the statement and saying that police reform will not take place in its true essence until it's happening more and more to white people. And
but it is happening a lot to white people.
And I believe that in my heart of hearts, that definitely is going to be a thing. There was 2 police officers. They had a woman. They broke her arm in the process of detaining her. She had dementia, and they were caught fist bumping and doing that power up move, and they got fired instantly. I mean, so you are seeing more and more cases where police are, you know, kind of throwing the elbow towards, you know, white folks, and then now things are happening and moving a little bit faster than what they normally would. Because in the same breath, I have seen older and elderly Black women get their teeth knocked out, and that goes unchecked. So, I mean, let's read another comment. Let me see.
I can't.
So Cash says Black people should be the most politically active and engaged group in America.
Cash is right. To your point, though, you made a point about like I said it in jest. If you want more gun oversight, gun control, gun reliability or accountability, whatever you want to call it. If millions of us went out and got our licenses, it would happen. The reason why I say that is because a lot more of us are starting to vote, and what are they starting to do?
Suppress.
Exactly. So if you want that to take place, then you go out and you start getting
but it's
licenses
the sad
to carry.
part about it is, why do we constantly have to fight a system year after year after year? That's what we need to look at. And we're speaking to this point right now. Okay, so we voted, we made noise, we brought our people together, and then they start putting laws into place. We shouldn't. I know we all know damn well we shouldn't have to, but what is it that we can do to bypass or attempt to bypass them putting another law, barrier, wall in place to continue to push it back?
I have
we
a
live
question.
on planet Earth.
I have a question. Well, I have something, and I say this: if you know the game was never meant for you to be played, then you have to outsmart the person. You know what I'm saying? So with that being said, you have to be strategic. So they make a law stating that, hey, you cannot do these big bus drives on a Sunday to go and vote. Well, guess what? We're going to do that on Saturday.
That's only if you could get the permit that you have to go to them to get to be able to do but again, it's always.
But here's the kicker. But if you know, and I understand you have to go through loops and these different things, but it can be done. If you tell me right now, like, you know what, election time is on this day. I hope we're focused because there's another election coming up pretty soon. You know, we're not just waiting for Biden, and because a lot of times people vote out for that, a presidential election. There's a smaller one too, but we need to be on that as well. And there's ways to outthink. How about if you have somebody who doesn't have a proper ID? Let's go find them and help them to get proper ID, you know, and these different things. There's ways that we can still help our community. So I hope that definitely somebody gets that message and wants to act out on that. Go ahead, Liz.
So Aurelia says, yes, unity is true power. And so it's your boy D. The media want a story, they always do. That's what they're paid for. What's going to be bigger? A stray bullet kills a kid or police shoots a young kid on the street. So it is a lot of sensationalism. That's true too. Absolutely. So Mark said, it's bad enough we have to deal with criminals, but when we are being hurt and killed by those sworn to protect us, it's an extra problem that we shouldn't have to deal with.
That makes me think about what was stated earlier about, you know, just if the bad cops, they were bad or they had bad behavior before they entered into law enforcement. And it makes me think of something my father always said: you're never a criminal until you get caught and you're labeled. So, you know, again, we have them all up in the system, but until you get labeled as that, you breeze right through.
I bet you if you took all of the police officers and deputies, anyone involved in law enforcement, and you asked them a bunch of questions, you would find that they may be different ethnically and ideology, in reference to their ideology, but there's certain characteristics that are mutual. I think we as a society have to have better hiring practices and more intrusive questioning and not the same old, same old. I'm telling you, when you look at an individual or individuals that citizens deem to be fantastic officers and fantastic servants, I guarantee you, if you were to collect all of them and ask them questions privately, a lot of what they are, who they are, their moral compass is probably extremely similar. But I don't believe that we're doing that. I believe that we have a standard of hiring practice standards, and we use those. That doesn't mean it's bad. I'm just saying, if we want better people serving people, then we need to figure out a way to find better.
Well, then that goes back to what Ty said, because Ty was talking about the EEOC, and that's like the federal level for HR.
But what power does the EEOC have? What power do they have?
Well, you can sue that company for different things, you know, that person, you can, they're violating, discriminating, and this, that, and the third. But then it goes to a lower level, the gatekeepers. If you have a company and they all look a certain, you know, flavor, and they all have that standard of who they want in power. Remember, you said the police officers came from the slave patrols. Then you had the Irish that joined in, you know, and then you had this, and they kept it in the family. It's a lineage of police officers. And if you're trying to keep that same mentality going, I'm going to look for certain people to come join my group. Now, of course, there's African Americans who want to be police officers stuff, so they started getting inclusive. Okay, and now we got all types of people now. There's Native Americans in the police force or whatever. But at the end of the day, at the crux of it all, there is a structure and there's a tone that if you're going to really try to go in there deep, and I was going to ask you about that. There was a movie that Al Pacino, I'm a big fan of Al Pacino, had made back in the, I want to say late 60s, early 70s, called Serpico. And that movie basically was about how this cop really wanted to serve his community, but seen a lot of different crime going, and he wanted to report this. And everybody's like, yo, you can't go against the grain. You actually have a lot of different Black officers who have experienced different discrimination within the thing. And I know you mentioned that you didn't see it, but do you think now, as being a retired police officer, Because when you get to talking, you're preaching, and we're like, "Amen, yeah, brother, yeah," and we're doing these things. But I know there is a group that does not want to hear what you have to say. They do not appreciate you having these conversations, and if you talk anymore, I may email you and send you some hate mail. So how do you deal with that?
I don't worry about that. First of all, I wouldn't open it, but I'm not here to necessarily agree or disagree. We all have a right to speak our minds as long as it's civil. But I don't gravitate toward. First of all, you're not going to intimidate me, homie. Don't play that. I'm a nice guy, but there is a limit to what I'm going to allow someone to do to me. I'm not going to walk around scared and all of that. And if you come at me, you better come at me and understand that I'm not necessarily going to run, at least in the opposite direction. You get what I'm saying? Like, I'm not a violent guy. I'm not going to stay quiet and let someone, I have a right to disagree with you, just like you have a right to disagree with me. I'm an active listener. Just like when an individual may type something that I don't necessarily agree with, I don't have to agree with it. They have a right to say that, as long as it's not offensive and threatening and harmful. I don't live my life like that. I think we need to get out of the mindset of trying to convince someone. I think we all have a right to be heard. We all need to be heard. We all need to express ourselves. And at the end of the day, all of us, even people that hate me or hate the badge and hate people that look like me and look like you, we all want to be safe, and we want to live in peace and productive neighborhoods. We can disagree on how we get there, but at least we have to acknowledge that we all want the same thing. Now let's work together to get there. But until we have a platform from which all of us are going to stand on and say, we want the same thing, then we're going to be doing this. And just like, I don't care what party you're a part of, I don't care about all that. I care about who you are as a person.
Gotcha.
So Cash says, states' rights have always been used to nullify the federal government and allow states and counties to abuse citizens unchecked. Yes and no, right? And so, because a lot of times when they are being abusive at the federal and at the state and county level, it is the federal government that has to come in and check them. So it's a fight that's been waged over and over in the courts, and we'll just have to continue to wage that war. But at the end of the day, usually it is the federal standard that is applied, and it usually wins. And so that's usually the only recourse we have, which is why Biden is sending in the DOJ and trying to right some of the wrongs, especially in places like Minnesota where they clearly have a problem. And then I also have a comment that came through on my phone from somebody that doesn't want their name on the screen. And so it says, this is our challenge now as Black people. What our ancestors went through was worse. We need to stand up and keep on pushing the agenda. It feels good to hear this conversation, and we need to have many more.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate the comment.
We also need to be supportive of young people from various backgrounds getting involved in law enforcement. I'm truly blessed. If I had family members that didn't want me to do this job or don't want my younger siblings and my other family, they're not voicing their opinion. They're very supportive. So I think we need to be supportive of those family members that want to take on the challenge, because no other time more than now do we need balanced, rational, forward-thinking, caring people to do this job. And it's not easy. The average person cannot do this job. Let's be honest. It's not meant for the average person. It's just not. I can tell you, I still have dreams about, and I still sometimes find myself crying about when I held a lady in 1998, New Year's Eve, in my arms that had just been hit by a bullet through her left breast, and it came out of her left tricep. I'll never forget her bleeding all over me. You get what I'm saying? So that's not, and then 20 minutes later, after I changed uniforms, I had to go deal with a guy who had just sexually assaulted someone. So what I'm saying is the average person, not because we're better, it's just we're different. This is not a job for the average person. I've run into a burning building before. I've responded to an active shooter before in the Gateway building. So what I'm saying is that the average person is not going to do that. That doesn't make me better. It just makes us different. So we need good people doing this job. We need that. And if you have family members or friends that are doing it and they're good people, you need to support that. You just do. We just do. We just
And a
need to stop
stressed out
saying
person doesn't mean you're not a good person, because as being a
exactly.
human being, you are allowed to be stressed out and not know how to deal with that stress in that moment when you're playing doctor, delivering babies, the medical person coming in, pulling up the wound, dealing with mental health, domestic violence, rape crisis, a child that's lost. What you guys are, and we do put a lot of expectations on you, because this in society, how we were taught to rely on law enforcement, and again, not realizing that when if I'm going to be a medical assistant, that's what I do. There is a specific guideline for being a medical assistant. You may draw blood, you EKGs, report to the doctor, but you guys are literally everything. You're breaking up fights within the home with parents and children or siblings. Again, you're dealing with dogs, cats lost over here, somebody drunk that just need to talk to you for the night. So again, you guys go through a lot. And I think we also forget that, because as much as we want to see you as the save all in all, but then target you for everything that goes wrong.
I think to add to that, it's the perspective once again.
Right.
Because working in, like I said, that domestic violence, when I was seeing the heinous crimes, and I'm a survivor, and I think my story is bad, but when you see things that are like, man, she can't even walk anymore, or half of her face have acid on it, these things, I'm like, can you put a police on every corner, please? Just because it's like, wow. And to hear these things, it literally desensitizes you, story after story after story after story. And on the same breath, though, it's still heartbreaking when you say, okay, well, this is the way a police officer is treating someone's Tasha on 5th Street. But then when you see your counterpart and they're treated completely different, and it's such a double standard. And I really, really feel that our youth, if we are able to, in reference to working in law enforcement somehow, we have to be able to say, you know what, let's go ahead and make a change. Because I know that if more of us get up in there, there's going to be all types of policy changes. We just implemented that you can't come into a house and knock more than one time. Because we're not going to be able to police the same way that our counterparts can.
You can't even carry a gun no more. They taking guns.
You
get a baton.
Like how they do in Britain. Can you read this one? It's your boy.
And so, okay, it's your boy. That's the world we live in. They have the power. We are going to have to deal with this suppressive system for generations to come. Ooh, that's defeatist. So, Cash, what are ways we can affect the collective bargaining process and police union power?
By knowing when it's taking place. Second of all, meeting with city and or county officials and finding out what that process entails, right? So you're not necessarily going to be able to sit at the table, because those are done by lawyers and financial advisors, and you're not going to be able to do that. But understanding that process and what it actually entails, and possibly getting a heads up on what some of the issues are, because I think it's every 2 or 3 or 4 years. So when I retired, there had been one that had been passed not too long before. And it's very taxing, because these individuals are basically bartering for what they feel is right and what they feel someone deserves on one side and someone doesn't deserve on another side. So it's very challenging, and you're dealing with some people's futures. That determines whether or not a large portion of officers stay and a large portion of officers go. But it's imperative to get involved with the city government. Not only, it's a lot to ask for people, but if we want to see change, we have to get involved with it. I always say, go for a ride along with your local law enforcement. Every single person that's ever ridden with me, it changes their life. Every single person that we've put, my former agency put in front of a simulator, and we're putting them in a real police scenario, you could see their heart rate. You could see them. I had a local media entity, a radio personality, go through a shoot don't shoot scenario, and this person broke down crying. Why? Because they're human. That doesn't mean officers don't break down crying. It just means that We may not do it in the heat of the moment. We may do it later on. Again, it doesn't make us better. And for every quote unquote bad one, I guarantee you there's thousands and thousands of good ones. I'm not justifying a bad one. I'm not doing that. We need to get bad ones out of there, but I am saying there's a heck of a lot more good ones.
Before we get to the comment, I do want to ask this question because it's your boy. That's my son, who I encourage to join the military. I'm happy he joined the military, and he's a military police officer, and he wants to get into law enforcement. So I'm really happy with that. But when you talk about, for every bad one, there's thousands that are good. I wanted to ask you, so in the military, when you see somebody cutting up, because there's people cut up in every job, we're going to get that fact out. There's always somebody abusing power and doing this, and they're a little bit too cocky or whatever. But in the military, if you have somebody who's just rotten to the core, we will hold you to accountable immediately. We are shutting you down. Even if we have to do a quiet blanket party and beat your ass later, we fitting to do that. We not playing because you're not going to insult. You're not going to insult the uniform. We're not going to go out there looking crazy.
Yeah, that's illegal.
We're not under law. We're under the military's law. So you talking to the wrong person.
Bring it back.
Specs is feeling like I'm feeling right now. Most likely.
It's not illegal.
You see his face. His face.
That is illegal.
But we're not civilians, though.
It doesn't matter. Your bases are in communities and neighborhoods. You can't just. I get what you're saying because I would assume.
Well, let's not say we putting hands on nobody. How about that? We're not putting hands on nobody, but we're going to do a kumbaya session. We're going to do a kumbaya
that
session.
Was hypothetically speaking. Had a
her cousin coming to her defense.
That's what I do.
At the end of the day, you get what I'm saying. Though, regardless if it's a verbal talk or whatever the case may be, we're going to hold you to a higher standard immediately. So I wanted to read this comment, or Liz, you could read the comment.
All right, so it's your boy. So why do they skip past the taser and the baton? Because I'm a certified MP, and their standards are through the roof. They enforce the 7 levels of force.
That's a great question. The challenge is each scenario is different. Each situation is different. So it's not necessarily that it is skipped. It may not. If you have a gun, you're not going to put out. If someone has a gun, if a bad person has a gun or someone you're dealing with has a gun, you're not going to put out a taser or a baton or spray. So it's called, at my former agency, it's called the response to resistance. So you respond to the level of resistance, matching that resistance or greater. So you have to take into account the totality of it. So when you see a lot of these things that take place, I always say, first of all, I wasn't there. So I have the benefit of sitting down on my laptop going, that was wrong, that was right, that was nice, that was bad, that was horrible. Oh my God. So what I'm saying is I think sometimes we need to pause because even the body cameras are one-dimensional. You're not feeling the energy of an individual because I've been around individuals, as I'm sure all of you have, that their energy in and of itself says this is a bad person. Now, I'm not justifying hurting them. What I'm saying is all of that has to come into play with what you're doing. So depending upon the situation, you're going to rise to the level of, and then what is your training and what is your confidence level? Because we're talking about officers that are human beings. It doesn't justify bad things. What I'm saying is, I don't know if you're talking about a specific incident, then we can speak to that. But in general, if a 5'1" female officer or male officer is fighting a guy that's 6'8", you think that their level of in reference to a progression is not going to be quicker? It's going to be quicker because of the totality of the circumstances.
Go ahead, Specs. Oh.
I'm sorry, I'm still on mute.
Yeah, go ahead.
That was a thing that caught my attention that I've seen a lot, and it was confidence level. When somebody feels inferior, and that's the thing, the officer feels inferior, he automatically pulls his gun, or she pulls her gun when the person doesn't have a gun or a weapon. That's the thing that you have to watch, because when somebody is that scared, and they might say, I'm not that scared, but if you're pulling a gun on me during a conversation, then you feel inferior. And that's something we have to deal with. That's the thing that is we have to measure. Because if I have a knife and you pull a gun, of course you should pull a gun. Because I can stab people, I can kill people.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm stuttering with a knife. But if we having a heated conversation and I'm not charging you, we're talking, or I'm sitting down and you pull a gun, that is nowhere near to be equal at all. So that's something we need. That's one thing. That's a big thing we need to challenge and be like, look, if this person is sitting down or they're talking, I don't care if we cussing. If I'm not being aggressive, because you can see how somebody can be aggressive, you can feel the energy like they're coming at you. But if they're sitting there and they're just speaking, and you pulling a gun on me, you pulling a gun and your finger is near the trigger. Your finger's not even straight. Your finger's on the trigger. That's not a measured response to what's going on here. And I think that's the biggest thing. And I gave cops, like my father was an MP, house full of like Marines and Army in my family. But that is not a measured response. And that's the thing I have. So when a police officer starts trying to say, well, I was like, look, man, obviously you feel inferior. That's what we need to go with, because you didn't fear for your life because that person didn't have you didn't have a measured response to that. So that's a lie. So that's my biggest thing when I see that from an officer, when he says I had fear for my life, to somebody that didn't have a weapon and didn't charge me.
That's a very good statement. I think one of the ways that can be addressed is getting with the powers that be at your law enforcement and making it mandatory that every time an officer draws their weapon, that they have to do a report, because then you can measure it. You follow what I'm saying? What I'm talking about, if you care about, remember what I said when we were offline, everything that is valued in our society is measured. To your point, Specs, that's a very good point. Unless and until every single agency is measuring that, it won't stop, because there's no report. It didn't happen.
Right.
Follow what I'm saying? So it's imperative that we understand that law enforcement, and a high school kid told me this years ago. I was in high school class for about 8 years. He told me police officers are trained, and we allow them to act on impulse and panic. Meanwhile, untrained citizens are supposed to remain calm with a gun or a taser pointed in their face. That was deep for me. That was like, how old are you? So to your point, Spec, yeah, that's true. But unless we measure that, we don't have anything to gauge it on.
I watched I almost got through a documentary, I guess, this morning on HBO. If you guys haven't seen it, I think it's called Ernie and Joe, Crisis Cops. It's about law enforcement officers that are basically leading the charge for a mental health unit in Texas. And, not to spoil it for you, but maybe entice you to watch it, because I found it fascinating. He mentioned that a call came in once, and it was a woman that waited till her kids were sleeping and everything. So let's give it a time. It was 10 o'clock at night. And she called the police and said, I'm thinking about killing myself. I have a gun. I'm thinking about killing myself. Right. So here's a woman that called reaching out for help. And as citizens, that's what you hear is, oh, my God, this woman is depressed. She's in distress. She's suicidal. As a police officer, you heard this woman has a gun. Right.
Yes.
You are now coming to the scene scared. Right. And so she's unstable. She has a gun. And here you are, a dead stranger, showing up to help. And the guy on the show was explaining that they came. I mean, all the gear, all the bullet vests, like the tactical team is coming and everything. And he's going, guys, there's a woman that's sad enough to call to say she wants to end her life. Like, all you heard was gun instead of hearing person. And you didn't hear the person. So I guess he asked for permission to respond a different way, kind of like a hostage negotiator would, if you would. And he said, has anybody called her? Like, that was the story that he told on the show, right? Has anybody called her? And they said, no, we're coming. And I mean, they are literally coming. And he says, get me her number. And he calls her and he says, hey, I'm really scared. I heard you have a gun. And she goes, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to hurt me. You know what I mean? And he goes, okay. So is it possible that you let me talk to you? There's a guy right now, he has binoculars, he can see you. If you would hold your gun up and put it down, I'm gonna walk towards you and you walk towards me and we'll just have a conversation. And imagine the team is coming, and this was the step that he chose to take, and it went down just like that. She held it up, she put it down, and they walked towards each other, and they had a conversation. He de-escalated it. And that particular documentary goes through him. You see him answering different calls. There was some paranoid schizophrenic that was high on drugs that people were calling about. And again,
Ernie and Joe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I gotta watch that.
Ernie and Joe. It's an amazing, amazing show, and I didn't get the time to finish it, but I'm beyond fascinated. And the reason I bring it up is because it can be done. You know, so yes, this woman had a gun. You know what I mean? And you've got, all of Texas descending on this woman with the gun. How could this have ended? Imagine she's standing in front of her door. Her kids are asleep inside. She called for help. You know what I mean? She could have just killed herself.
And it's called crisis intervention, which they are trained to do.
So I want to pose a question to the audience, and we'll talk. The last little topic we'll talk about before we get into the comment. Well, after we get into the comments, is defund the police? Yes or no? I know that's been a big hashtag, and of course we'll talk a little bit about that and what that truly means. But I just want to hear the audience. Do you feel like it definitely needs to be defunded or reformed? I guess there's many different terminologies that we can throw at that.
All right. So Z says, would you be in favor of national hiring and policing guidelines?
Yes, as long as they're rational. Yes.
Yes.
I think that's something that should be spoken to. I think communities need to. I don't think that any one entity should hold the power in deciding that. I think citizens need to be at the table and be a part of that process. But personally, yeah, I think there should be national guidelines. Yes.
I think, and we're going to have a show about this, the CJ field in general, because right now you have a police officer and he arrested somebody, right? But then what happens after that in processing, how much time does one get? How much this? Because we sit back and we look at these things and it's like, wow, when I hear that 400 people have been arrested for the Capitol riots or insurrections or whatever title you want to use, but some of them got to go to trips to Mexico. Some of them were fed organic food. Like, what's up with legal
felonies, right?
Don't like spam, but he got to eat the spam if that is even spam. So we definitely want to talk about that a little bit later. Okay, it's your boy says. Go ahead.
First being interpersonal communication, speaking. Second being unarmed defense tactics. Third is the baton. Fourth, OC and taser, and so on.
Okay. Thank you for that.
It's a little bit different on the law enforcement side. They bring them, they don't talk necessarily about that in that process. They talk more of someone is actively resisting, passively resisting, aggressively resisting. What are the options that you have at your disposal per policy? That's what it's different in the military.
I have a question. I think we're on the same page.
I'm sorry, Kate. We're just getting questions and questions.
Yes.
What?
So I'm pretty sure Vicky and I are on the same page, right? So if you are shooting someone that has a gun, why not shoot to disarm as opposed to the kill shot?
Okay. First of all, when you're doing firearms training, the goal is to shoot at the largest part of the body because that's an easier target to hit. So legs move and legs are more narrow. So there's no police agency unless you're a sniper, and snipers get different types of training in the military and police. You're not shooting at legs and arms and at the gun. That only can be done in movies. So when the acute stress response kicks in, which is called fight or flight, and it's the body's physiological response to a threat or fear or violence, you have tunnel vision, your hands are trembling. This is for officers and someone that they're dealing with. So to say that you can just shoot their legs, that's never going to happen. You're going to miss. You have a greater likelihood of missing. So you have a less of a likelihood of shooting center mass. It's just factual because you're aiming at a larger target. And understand this, it is extremely expensive for agencies to train their personnel in firearms, because not only do you have OSHA and lead to be worried about, you have the purchasing of the rounds and the range, it's extremely, I would say to you, at an agency in Central Florida with 500 or more, that's almost $10 million a year.
But how much
Just
is
to
each
train
life
2
worth?
or 3 times a year. I'm just saying. So
What did you say this? What did you
So
say?
how much is a
Large
life
mass.
worth?
I get it, but large muscle mass, the likelihood of you hitting
Well,
someone.
My piggyback
large
question
muscle
for that is if you're going to say shoot center mass, it's a bigger thing, bigger to shoot and these things so you can actually hit the individual. Why are there scenarios where somebody's like, you unloaded a gun on somebody or somebody shot somebody 40 times? Like literally, did you just reload and shoot this man? Like,
Right.
Well, you have to,
what?
in law enforcement, some agencies, not in Florida, but most likely not in Florida, some agencies double tap. We don't do all of that. You shoot until the threat is no longer a threat. It sounds horrible. Understand, there's nothing nice about uses of force. Right? There's no way to put that nicely. It is a horrible thing. But when you make a decision to pull a weapon to deal with another individual, it's not going to end well. If you pull the trigger, it's not going to end well.
It's the whole thing is crazy and it's so bad. I've seen scenarios and we've all seen it on the TV or maybe even went through it or know somebody personally when they say you're resisting arrest. If you twist back my arm, my natural reflex is to resist. So when you take that big club and you bang me upside my head, when I go like this, ow, I'm not resisting you. I'm holding the pain. The blood is oozing. I'm not gonna curse. You officer, don't you see what's happening? So then they're like, oh, I see what you're doing. You're resisting me. I'm not resisting you. I'm human. Are they trained to know that if you take a billy club and knock somebody in the head, that's going to do a reaction?
Common sense would tell you yes, but I can tell you in times of uses of force, not necessarily for me, because again, I wasn't in training, but I helped out with training and I was certified to train. So I did a lot more training, and there are officers that do a lot more training than your average officer. The average officer most likely is just going to go through the necessary protocols. They're not going to go above and beyond. I'm not a mediocre person. There are nuances about body control, and it's obvious. If a law enforcement canine is biting you, and you go to touch that area, it's not because you're resisting, you're in pain. That is common sense. So I can see that, but the average person that is scared for their life and doesn't train often and out of shape and never really had a fight in their life that's wearing a badge and a gun is not going to see that.
Let's go to some comments real quick.
So Annie says, I believe as long as they continue to blatantly give out badges to racists and those who stigmatize us, it will make it that much harder for us to conquer the problem of police brutality.
I believe so too. I think that the whole HR process has to be revamped.
So the popcorn passport, there needs to be a level of accountability for the police. Some, not all, but clearly some. Let's say there are 5 to 10% of bad officers. Where are the 90 to 95% of good officers? They need more space. So, continued. How do we trust the good ones when they stand right next to the bad ones and act like they don't see it?
And that was the question I had in reference to the military. Like, we really will, like I said, it doesn't have to be a physical thing, but verbally, we will hold
you're vicariously liable for the actions of your fellow officer. So it depends on the particular agency, and it depends on what's going on at that time. I can tell you that the average officer that I've ever worked with is not going to stand by while someone else is doing something like that. So you have to be, that may happen at agencies, but you really got to be willing to throw your life away and throw your pension away and all these other things.
Not see what's been happening over the hundreds and the years of.
Right, but what I'm talking about in a specific incident, that's not. Because understand this, officers that are doing that are not going to do it around officers that they know are on point. Just like the clerk that works in a particular store is not going to steal money when she's working with a bagger that's on point. So what I'm saying to you is an officer that is on point is not going to deal with that. And it doesn't happen around those officers.
Okay, so I have a personal instance that I can just kind of put out there, right? So imagine I have an interaction with a police officer that I feel was a bad interaction. You were nowhere near this scene. You were not present or anything, right? But you happen to be the cop that stands outside of my grocery store. I'm just picking a place, right? And so you're the cop that I see regularly. I say good morning to you, you say good morning back. I don't even know your name, but I've seen you enough times, right? And so I come to you, and maybe it's a day or two later, and I happen to see that. I say, officer, I have a question, right? And you're, yeah, because we've seen each other enough. Again, we don't know each other's names or anything. This is a cordial neighborhood type thing, right? And I say to you, officer, I have a question. I had this instance where a couple of days ago I had a run-in with an officer, and I need to know who to speak to because I feel like this, and this was wrong. And when I tell you that officer went completely blank, it was like, the soldiers that they have protecting Buckingham Palace where they look straight ahead, they don't see you, you can do anything you want to them. Like that was, I swear to you, the response I got was they went completely blank, completely. And when I was, done speaking, he goes, all right, so have a good day.
Wow.
That was the response I got. And that was all I needed to know. And it wasn't even the same jurisdiction. I live very far away from where the incident took place. It was just a matter, all I wanted to know, I didn't want his opinion. I wasn't saying, what do you think about that? I said, who should I speak to? Who should I call? Which if you remember a couple questions ago, I said, who do you call for that? My question to that officer was,
I would have went on that website for you.
Okay.
And shown you the internal affairs phone number to call. And most likely I would have known someone at that agency of rank, and I would have been able to put you in contact with them. But I can tell you most of the time, an officer that does that or a deputy that does that on all of their calls. So mediocrity and laziness is not something that just pops up when you're complaining on an officer. There are people in our society that are mediocre and that are lazy and below par and subpar. So what I'm saying to you is I'm not justifying it because that's horrible. And obviously it made you feel badly. And I feel sorry that happened to you. But that officer or deputy is like that all the time. All the time. Mediocrity is not something that just pops up when it's convenient. People that are mediocre all the time.
Yeah, this felt a lot like that blue wall, though. This really did feel like, have a great day now. I mean, you just kind of had to be there. So even though that officer was nowhere near present, and even though they're not from the same county, city, nothing of the sort, the fact of the matter is, I'm not helping you with that. Now, and I've seen this officer help other people enough crossing the street. I've seen him help the little old lady cross the street. He has walked me to my car. I mean, like I said, we've interacted before. So I have no choice but to believe that he was just a part of the system and the problem. And by the way, that the gentleman I'm speaking about happened to be a darker skinned person. And so it was that much more disappointing.
Because when I told you I got called out of my name, it wasn't by an African-American cop. It was by a white cop. And it was interesting because I remember another cop came to the scene. Another cop pulled me to the side and said, he's one of those cops. Don't say nothing to him. This is not going to end well for you. And I was happy he told me that, but shocked, like, oh, sniggity snap, it's going down tonight. Mm-hmm. And it's just heartbreaking because I know for a fact that Karen, my next door neighbor, that's not going to happen. So I've seen white people spit. I mean, the ultimate disrespect is spitting, like that phlegm that comes from the back, that COVID spit. You know what I'm saying? I've seen that. COVID. But you know what I'm saying? Right in the face. And nothing happens.
Look at the protests at the park, that they cleared so that dude could go take that picture, right? And look at the insurrection. Like there's a very clear line to what's acceptable in this country and what is not. Who is acceptable in this country and who is not? Those people killed officers that day. We have so
many comments we have to run through.
But Liz, just real quick, just because they're skin folk doesn't mean they're kinfolk. Just because he looked like us doesn't mean.
Because it's about the mindset. You better preach, brother. Now we're gonna get together and do some type of coalition together. But I tell you what, KP, you gonna stand in front of me because when it's going down, I'm like, ah.
So it's your boy, Yes, respond to the level of resistance, which we were taught. I'm sorry, my dog's barking. But only one of those weapons can completely eliminate the person.
Yes.
Right? So don't take much effort to shoot someone. You can shoot someone off of fear.
Yes.
Yep. Then he also says,
So I was trained on dealing with individuals twice our size and that are stronger than us. There are multiple ways to deal with those type of people without being aggressive. You have backup for a reason.
yes, it's your boys on it. Thank you.
All over it, right? So, seen a civilian police officer pull some man over the size of Shaq. She turns her back for half a second and all you see was him pounding her face in. I say a lack of thought process in her traffic stop.
Yeah, definitely. Because there's a certain way that you should pull an individual over if you are going to be asking them questions. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay.
Military police standard and teaching need to be invested and thought to civilian police.
Yeah.
Like all right. It will only benefit the community. That's fair. That's a good suggestion. And so Aurelia said we definitely need to defund the police. And this is the answer to Kia's question. So we definitely need to defund the police and put those funds towards education and healthcare.
Okay.
Understand the neighborhoods that we wanted.
Okay, go ahead.
She said, I also
advocate
believe
of-
we should defund.
It depends on what you mean by defunding. I have a degree in finance. Defunding means a reallocation of funds and resources and fiscal accountability and responsibility. If you think that neighborhoods that are socioeconomically deprived, just defunding the police, which I don't know what they mean by that, but taking funds away from the police and not putting those, refunding the neighborhood is going to work, I have a bridge to sell you. So as we talk about defunding the police, we have to understand that the neighborhoods, not the residents, but the neighborhoods that we're talking about doing this in call the police the most. So earlier when I said we need to completely understand what we want officers to respond to. If you don't want officers to respond to X, Y, and Z, then stop having them do that. If you just want them to respond to violent encounters, then work with your local government and leadership to do that. But to say that you don't want police officers to be there anymore, what happens? What do you think is going to happen in certain neighborhoods when police aren't there?
Yep. Go ahead.
Aurelia said, I also believe we should defund the military and send our troops home. $1 billion budgets to keep peace are a little ridiculous. Kia's like, oh, hell nah.
Everyone sees things differently.
The only reason why I
Right,
say
right. Everyone sees it. That's her perspective.
Here's the kicker, though. So if we're going to say, and like you made a statement, like if we're going to defund the police, what happens into that impoverished neighborhood? You know, if we defund the military, and we're giving money elsewhere when we have terrorist attacks, when we have, there was actually something that's being looked into. It was something about, it's a Havana scan. I forgot the name of it, but basically they're saying that the Russians did it or whatever the case may be, where they were able to take electricity and do something, whatever, in the air. And then the whole neighborhood got sick. People had stomach diarrhea problems, all types of stuff. So when it comes to cyber attacks, when it comes to electricity and all these different things, it goes down. So yes, there is true reasons as to why are we over here in certain countries and this, that, and the third. But at the same time, though, as soon as we say, hey, bring our homies back, it has to be a balance somewhere.
And I don't think that, I'm not saying that this person is necessarily wrong. My question to anyone that says that is what other things are you going to implement to service these areas that you're saying defund the police? Because that's easy to say that, but in theory, but in practice, I've dealt with a rape victim before. And who else is going to respond to catch this individual? And I sat with her for 4 hours and I brought in other resources and I caught the individual that raped her. So what I'm saying, if we don't respond, how does that, that's all I'm saying.
That's what people forget. And we, again, just reiterating it, if a police gets called to deal with someone who's schizophrenic, having a mental health breakdown, and they're not trained to do it, but there's no one else to respond, That's what happens with us. We have a mental mobile health that the police try to call and they won't respond. So then the police has to go back. Yeah. Yeah.
Read this.
So It's Your Voice says no, they need to fund it. We just complained about why we can't do this and that in certain situations. KP gave the answer that there's not enough funding. So we need to fund it, in my opinion. So we have two different points of view there.
But the thing is, both of those points of view in reference to communities A, B, and C need to be at the table, because in the middle of that is a rational collaboration that can be agreed upon. You get, we can't just have this or that. It has to be this and that.
So Cash says, we spend way too much money on policing and not enough on root cause issues. A lot of crime is poverty driven. I would agree. A lot of this is preventable. A lot of it is preventable.
Last time we touched on it, ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and PACEs. I joined PACEs 2 weeks ago, which is positive and adverse childhood experiences. Those two organizations are creating a resilient community. These organizations are tapping into the root of some of these causes, because when you look at neglect, abuse, and household dysfunction, poverty touches all of them. And that's what's happening overwhelmingly in socioeconomically challenged neighborhoods, where you see a lot of police overreach, or it's perceived that there's a lot of police overreach in neighborhood where there is poverty. So understanding ACEs and PACEs is vital.
I would also throw in there, though, it's not necessarily always poverty. I mean, poverty is an overarching major one, but we've also had your affluenza team that's had it a little too good and now doesn't know how to act. I think a lot of crime, and I mean, this is just my opinion, I don't know what the actual statistics are, but most working parents, so you're talking working middle class parents, do not get to see their children enough. If you work 9 to 6 and school lets out at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, who is with your children? And the small ones are in daycare, but the dangerous ages are the not daycare ages. So from 4th grade, where you're about 9 years old, a little too old for daycare, old enough to stay home by yourself, until 17, you are unsupervised for hours at a time because your parents have the audacity to work. What can come out of that other than teenage pregnancy, drug use, and other nefarious things? And so that's not even poverty driving that at that point. That's the middle class that's driving a problem in society. You can't have unsupervised 9 to 19-year-olds. Like, whose idea was that? So that's just putting that out there. I'm sorry. Let's read the comment.
No, that's there's no argument. That's true.
And so It's Your Boy. It's yeah, we are literally taught to kill Ma. Kill me. To kill. Oh, okay, I got you. We're literally taught to kill Ma. You serve too. That's one to the head. Ain't nothing nice in the enforcement side of the job.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah. So we got Marine Corps. I'm not mad at you. Thank you.
Hey, there you go.
Not mad at you. But for it to exist, someone is standing there, it probably referring to something else that we were talking about. Thank you, Liz. I'm just running through them real quick because we are definitely going in. I'm pretty sure some officers even lack knowledge about their own job. Can't say he lacked it, Miss Liz, but some probably do. And then the last one, it's a choice. I've seen police handle whites different than blacks. We all have. Dylan Roof killed blacks in church after they offered him water, and the cops took him to Burger King after the shooting.
Right.
Oh man,
heartbreaking.
Definitely. There is a silence in our neighborhoods, in the police community as well. Criminals tear through our neighborhoods. Bad cops police our streets. The good on each side must work together. With all that being said, wouldn't it be pertinent for police and police unions to voice that what some level of reform? So basically to see how we can put it all together to get that reform together. So yes, I definitely think that we need we have to work with the unions, or kind of slide in on the DMs. See who's
reform is coming, whether communities and or law enforcement entities want them. You're either going to go and collaborate, or you're going to be dragged to it. When you think about where we are now as a society, we have body cameras because citizens demanded it.
Robert Long killed 8, taken alive, given a vest for his protection. I wanted to mention what you just said in regards to the body cameras. I mean, we just had a recent killing in North Carolina. I don't remember the first name, but I know his last name was Brown. And with that being said, they only released a little bit of the body footage, the camera footage. Is there a certain thing? Because I always notice when we're in the wrong, if the civilian did something wrong, they immediately release the footage. Is there something type of protocol, or each state is different?
Each state is different. Their state is a little bit is very different. But if you notice, a lot of what happens in Florida, they release the body cam video, or at least a portion of it, more than the seconds that they released in North Carolina. But I'm of the mindset to release it, whether it's bad or good, as long as it doesn't interfere in the totality of the investigation. Because if it's bad, in reference to the officer or law enforcement doing something wrong, it's not going to get any better by waiting 90 days. And if it's good, you can kind of quell the overall tone of something going wrong in reference to the citizens, the way they think about officers. But one of the keys to is being communicating 6 months to a year before that incident happens. In other words, using social media to your advantage. Every week did you know? And have that did you know? If an officer gets involved in a shooting, this happens. Have that spin thousands of times a day, and then move on to the next week. Did you know if you have an issue with an officer, you can report it to such and such? That's what I'm talking about. You cannot just have law enforcement go through a reform and not have the community go through a reform in education. Both sides need to work in a collaboration, and both sides need to be educated.
Absolutely true. Cash says, just want to thank the guests. There was a lot of good info given tonight. I learned a lot. Thank you. Thank you. Last couple of comments. The number one thing is communication from the cop to the individual. Regardless, you can easily escalate or de-escalate a situation. Don't forget, body language is also communication. The girl with the cigarette. You know, it's funny because even though I'm a mother and sometimes sons don't be listening to moms, I be like, man,
you want to know why? Because it's your boy. It's your boy. That's why.
Wow.
Okay, son.
That young man is looking like this.
You're taking notes.
All right. Sometimes you have to put your pride aside or do stuff you don't like to come home to your family. And that is so true on both ends. On both ends. And this is somebody who is 20, just turned 20 years old. I'm sorry to put you out there like that, but for somebody to be 20 years old, Aurelia, she's also somebody. I think
That's
she's
my daughter, y'all.
These two individuals, of course, I know my son, but I've known Aurelia also since she was a little kid as well. And to see them now being engaged, and these are the individuals that were going to be making a difference, you know, and these are the ones that we need to have more of their voices and their opinions, because at the end of the day, they're definitely going to be the ones to make a difference. And we have to do something with our youth to get it all together.
And we need more platforms like this and more parents like y'all to educate your kids at home and not expect social media and the school and everyone else to give them this type of education.
2 last questions that I'm taking. They were coming in tonight. So I'm so sorry. KP, I felt like it was 21 questions. Okay, and go.
No, it's all right. It's all right.
Good night. Good show. Thank you so much. Great guest. Thank you. And then last question, but it would go a long way if, let's say, the NYPD say we want to take a portion of our funds and devote it to having a better interactions with our communities.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely agree. I think it's a two-way street. I think that one of the comments that was said about communications, we both have to put our pride to the side. I mean, like I said, if you know that this system wasn't made for you anyway, I wouldn't per se just start cursing out a cop just because I don't have the time. I honestly don't have the time to sit back and be like, you this, that, and the third. I mean, maybe when I was younger, but you can't get now, KP. But now I'm not cursing out nobody. I just don't have the time, you know. But I definitely want to say thank you to our guests. We had so many questions, probably questions that.
Thank you. This was beautiful. This is beautiful.
So that we can take more action. I really think that the society has to know and educate ourselves with the laws, with their local laws and their community laws, and how we could be more engaged with our community, because that's definitely how it's going to be. Before we go, I have to talk about Liz's shirt. Can you shout us out? What does it say? What we got going on?
So it says, "End police brutality." We've got a young Black man taking a knee a couple years ago that was controversial, and it was the end of the whole world. And who knew every single day it'd be that relevant. So guys, grownhonestconcepts.com. I appreciate all the love. I appreciate the support. This one's up there. Every time we have a live show, I wear another one of my designs, and I hope you just come check out the site. If nothing else, give it a visit.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Love you.
Thank you.
Thank you, KP.
Thank you. God bless.
Specs, I'm sorry, your audio is always kind of.
Wow, leave that brother alone.
I love you, Specs. I love you. I love you.
We hear you. We in your spirit. Bye, guys.